Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This debate, and I haven't made up my mind on this, this debate reminds me a lot of the debate we're having in healthcare about whether the United States government should set up its own health insurance program to compete with the private sector. That's just an observation. Second observation, Mr. Steen, I have great respect for the Fed, and I would remind you, though, that it was the Fed, or at least people influencing the Fed, who decided in 2008 that the community banks were just as responsible as the too big to fail banks for the meltdown, which was patently untrue, and some people around here decided to try to regulate you and your colleagues after death, which I think hurt the banking system. So I just caution you up here in Washington, don't trust anybody too much. President George, let me ask you this, and this is honestly a question. I don't mean the question to suggest an answer. Tell me what's wrong with RTP. Right? Is it not working? Can it not work? What's your concern?
So I have no insight to the functioning of RTP, but we have encouraged private sector innovation in this space, and for many years.
Can I stop you a second? If you have no insight into RTP, then why do you want to set up something to compete with it?
Because our interest in making sure, under our public policy goals, that access is broadly achieved for this service extends to some 10,000 institutions in this country, and we have an existing network, reach, and relationship with those institutions.
I get that, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't know, what I want to understand, I mean, doesn't the Fed have enough to do? It would just seem to me that if RTP can work, if you want to compete with it, that may be the right approach, but what I'm trying to understand is why.
Our interest.
I understand you have the power to do it, but why does it make sense to spend taxpayer money for the RTP, for the Fed to go set up a competitor for something that may be working? Unless it isn't. If it isn't working, tell me.
The information we took from the private sector task force came to the Fed and said we need the Fed to get into providing real-time payments with the private sector.
Why?
The reason was to achieve broad reach. We have many community banks in this country that are in rural and remote areas that would not otherwise be profitable places to provide services. They need these services for their communities. They need to be able to attach to systems that might otherwise be out of their reach.
May I stop you a minute? Because I don't mind, I'm not trying to be rude. Our time goes so fast.
Yes, sir.
So I mean, the Fed has the power to punish banks the rest of their natural lives. You and I both know that. I know you don't put it in those terms, and I'm not suggesting anything untoward. But so why don't you turn to RTP and say, look, here's some changes we would like to respectfully ask you to make. You don't have to make them, but our advice is you should. They're not going to ignore you, are they?
I think our experience is operating alongside the private sector has produced the best outcomes for the payment system.
Yeah, but my question is, if you see a way to improve, I'm trying to understand, if you see a way to improve RTP, why don't you just sit down with them and say, folks, here, we want you to extend your reach. We want you to give us jurisdiction over the prices you're going to charge, and we want to make sure that you make your service available to everybody. Boom, problem solved. Then you save a bunch of time and money, and you don't have to set up a competing system, because taxpayers are going to pay for what you're going to set up. And I know you have enough to do.
We certainly have enough to do, and we are intent on fulfilling our public policy authorities as Congress has granted us in this arena, which is to make sure that that system is accessible, that it's provided equitably, and that it is safe. And we will continue to operate alongside the private sector in achieving those outcomes for the public.
Okay. Can I ask one more, Mr. Chairman? Since it's just you. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut into Senator Smith's time. But I think, Ms. Blair is raising her hand.
Well, I did. I just wanted to strongly support what President George said and indicate that I get what you're saying about, so, first of all, they don't have regulatory authority. I think, so there is no direct authority to do rate regulation and access controls and all the kinds
Yeah,
of
but
things
they're not.
you would find with the
now,
public
look, we live in
utility.
the real world. The
Well,
banks aren't
but
going to
sir,
ignore the
if I
Fed
could
if the
just-
Fed
well,
tells them to do something.
I wish that was true. But as a Republican, and somebody who I consider myself market-oriented, I think competition is a much better discipline on pricing equity and efficiency and broadening customer bases than trying to prescriptively regulate this. So
Well, that's one
the
point
problem,
of view. Another point of view is you just want to expand government.
No, I don't think that's what the Fed's, look, I've worked with the Fed for a long time, and I've criticized, other parts of the Fed. I advocated for limits on the Fed's bailout authority. They probably weren't happy with me. Chairman Craper remembers that, and Dodd-Frank. So in other context, sure, the Fed's got a lot of power, but this is like bread and butter of what they do, and they are the only ones who can come in with an alternative parallel system because of the costs and the resources that are required to do this. If you just rely on private enterprise, there will be a single monopoly provider without the regulatory authority to impose pricing and access controls. So I do think that the Fed is absolutely, this is in the public interest to do, and it will be more efficient than just trying to regulate it with authority they don't have. And I think big banks push back quite a bit against the Fed and the FDIC, so I would not say that they always do what their regulator asks them to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, Senator.